Okay, so let's get going with the actual story now. Story one: The Lion. Chapter 1.1: Tea Stain Poetry. So what she does is at the beginning of each chapter, she quotes a letter from, and I think it's from the book that she mentioned, Feral Woman, which is her favorite book. Um, so that's how each chapter starts. So it's like a letter. It goes, Jacqueline Bellerose, 128 Avenue du Prado, Marseille, 13008. Cherie, Anastasia, and Sophia, I'm so sorry to hear about your book, Anna. Just remember that one rejection doesn't mean anything. They just couldn't see how amazing you are. Don't stop trying. I can't tell you how many times I've totally bombed auditions, but all it takes is one person to see how cool you are. Sunny Greece sounds amazing, but I've totally fallen in love with the clouds over Marseille. I had the most awesome day. It's been raining all day. I had a short shoot this morning. They put me in the worst outfit. When you guys see the pictures, you're going to cringe. Afterwards, my team wanted me to gym, but the rain looked so cool after the whole day in that hot dress. So I snuck away from them and ended up on the train tracks by the ocean. I can't tell you guys how awesome it was. My makeup was totally ruined, but just feeling the rain, smelling the wild rosemary, I danced on the train tracks for like hours. The trains were speeding by me, but it just felt so good, like I was a little still point in all the rush. One of the railway boys tried to tell me to get off the tracks, but I shut him up with a kiss, and we ended up dancing together. When I say the boy could dance. Oh, and Fia, how could you tell us about this hot boyfriend of yours without sending pictures? Anyway, me and Railway Boy kissed and danced and kissed, and I took off his shirt and he took off mine, and his breath was all misty against my skin, and, well, the train tracks were hard, and he was wild and gentle and rough all at once. It was better than heroin. I don't think he knew who I am. I'm kind of worried that someone saw us and took a picture or something. What's life without risks, right? Can't wait to meet you guys on the mountain. November's only like a few months away. I almost can't believe it. Une à toi, Jacqueline. And then the actual chapter starts. I spent nearly a week in Marseille before I met him. I'd landed at 3 p.m. on Monday, dragging all my luggage in a silly hot pink suitcase that James had always made fun of. A taxi driver in a dusty suit approached me, offering me a ride into town with a broken, in a hurry so you can't say no English, and before I could protest with my own stuttering half a semester 10 years ago French, he'd already stuffed my luggage into his cab and we were off. All the road signs were written in French, and I didn't know any of the songs playing on the radio. I left Ames, left James, and here I was, alone. Wonderfully, painfully, perfectly, and completely alone. I rolled down my window and let the winter air numb my nose. The harbour smelled of fish and sea, but the city, oh Lord, the city, it was wild lavender and thyme. Marseille was a sepia-tinged watercolour painting. 4 and 5-story buildings with the most intricate wrought iron railings, shuttered windows framed by dainty arches and twisted corbels. And I was here. This was Marseille, and I was here. I had left. I had left. The city's beautiful, I told the driver in a hushed whisper. Ah, yes, he said with a French accent. Very beautiful, very beautiful. Well, maybe not the whole city was as beautiful as I'd first thought. I stood outside the hotel, my hot pink suitcase in hand, making awkward eye contact with an old man as he peered against a graffitied wall. There weren't any pretty railings or streetlights. I wanted to say that the buildings were still sepia, but they felt distinctly more pea-coloured in this part of town. An elderly man checked me into the hostel, leading me over splintering wooden floors to my room. He wrinkled his nose as he opened the door. Mold and sweat. My heart sank. There were 4 double beds against the walls. A human-shaped bundle on one of them gave a wheezing groan. Apparently I'd booked a bed, not a room. Well, okay, it was all right, ne? I could deal with this. Sure, it wasn't in the best area, and sure, it wasn't the nicest room, but I wasn't exactly planning on spending a lot of time indoors anyway, right? And it was still Marseille. I spent days losing myself in the fairy tale that was Marseille. I explored the wide roads where autumn leaves covered the grounds like yellow bricks, and wandered the alleys that wound so thin they became lines of tea-stained poetry. I walked the promenades and watched the yachts leave from the harbour, I saw the great Notre Dame de la Garde as it watched over all Marseille from above the clouds. I was in Marseille. These yachts were the ones that Jacqueline had sunbathed on. Those train tracks were where she danced. I had breakfast in cafes while writing in my journal and working through a Learn French Quickly book. Each night, my bunkmate brought another boy home. The first night, I was disgusted. The third, I was just exhausted. But by the fifth, my French lessons were finally paying off, and I could understand the words she was moaning. And with that, I could finally tell her to fuck off in her own language. She didn't listen to me. Every now and then, while I was waiting for a tram or the bull, I'd take out my phone and stare at the black screen. I hadn't switched it on since I'd landed. I didn't want to see James's messages. I was afraid of him being angry or hurt. I was afraid he'd convince me to come back to Ames. I bought fruit from the little stalls with red and white striped canopies and tried to make friends with the vendors. I had dinner in candlelit restaurants and tasted the best wine in the world. Sometimes I saw my reflection in a store window and got trapped by the reminder that I was still myself. I'd stand there, staring at the woman I saw in the window. She was never smiling or laughing. She just stood there, vaguely hunched over in baggy clothes, while young French girls with steaming coffees and flawless faces passed her by. Around the corner from the hostel, there was a towering triumphal arch. It was a cold day, my sixth in Marseille, and there was almost no one else around. I pulled my coat tightly around myself as I waddled down the path towards the arch. It was as tall as the surrounding buildings, marble and so delicately carved. Angels and horses and trumpets and four figures standing atop extravagant pillars like gods and guardians. I stepped beneath the arch and imagined what it must have been like many years ago. I wondered if battle-worn soldiers had made their victory parades beneath this arch. I could almost hear their triumphant cries bouncing off the walls. My footsteps echoed empty against the marble. The inside was carved with beautiful reliefs, pictures of heroic men and their wives that had ascended to motherhood. I lay my hand against the cold stone, thumb brushing over the image. I'd come all this way. A different city, a different country, a different continent halfway around the world. But I was still here. The same me. Still here. I called my hand into a fist. Was it worth it? I left my marriage on a sticky note and my wedding ring on the counter. And now I was standing alone in the cold. Was it worth it? I leaned my back against the arch and took out my phone, staring at my reflection in the black screen. I'd spent all my youth on James, hoping he'd love me when I was older. Now I had no more youth to give. I missed him. Maybe it wasn't too late. He was my husband after all. I didn't want to be alone. I wanted him with me, and maybe he'd still forgive me. Maybe he'd still love me. Maybe I could still call him, tell him that I was sorry, ask him to ignore the note. I sank to the floor. I wanted to hear his voice. I wanted to apologize, to ask him to take me back. I was afraid. My screen flickered on. I braced myself for a torrent of angry messages and missed calls. One new message. I opened it. Hey, Mary. We're still on for lunch today. Julia. I blinked away tears and looked up. Maybe his phone was dead, or maybe he was in trouble, or maybe he'd just not noticed yet. There's a child standing just outside the arch, licking a lollipop and picking her nose. I opened James's chat. Last seen 20 minutes ago. He'd been online. He just didn't care. His wife of 17 years had left and he didn't even message. He didn't call. He genuinely didn't care about me. I opened his Facebook profile. It posted a funny video only a few hours ago. His life was going on as it always had without me. 17 fucking years. I remembered when we'd met. He'd crashed his bike and I'd bandaged his hands. I remembered him proposing and his laugh. I remembered our wedding and saying I do, kissing in front of his mother. I remembered him carrying me into our first house and making love on the counter. I remembered his laugh. And I remembered mine. When did I stop being good enough? I remembered the night when everything fell apart, when he left our bed. I remembered the way he looked at me. I remembered sitting alone, sobbing for hours. I remembered begging him to love me. I remembered the insults he hurled, and I remembered his silence. I remembered being broken by that silence. I had run from that silence. And here I was, a million miles away, crying over a stupid phone, still chained by that silence. Screw him. My phone shattered against the marble. Screw him. The child outside the arch dropped a lollipop and ran away. I'd never be what James wanted me to be. Screw him. Screw him if he didn't care. Screw him if he hadn't noticed. Screw him if he hated me. I'd left him with a sticky note, and he left me with nothing at all. I sniffed. It didn't matter. It was over. I'd forget all of this. It was over. That marriage was over. Those years were over. Those years were over. They were over. The loveless nights, the veiled insults, the days spent under fluorescent lights, they were over. I almost chuckled to myself. It was over. It was over. I laughed. For the first time in years, I laughed. I wasn't sitting alone in the kitchen with a bottle of wine. I wasn't making salad with Julia. I wasn't in Ames. I was in Marseille. I wasn't that old lady in the linoleum library anymore. I was that crazy woman that bought plane tickets and left her old life at a drop of a hat. I was here, without him. His silence meant nothing if I couldn't hear it. What happened to my dreams? I wrote in my journal. I just ordered dinner from a polite waitress and was looking out at the harbour. The setting sun cast everything in hues of orange. I heard snippets of 100 conversations from the people passing on the sidewalk. What did I want now that I was here? I'd saved all the money I got from the library for the past 17 years. It would probably last a while, but what did I want? It felt like I'd shelved all my dreams the day I quit studying to join James in Ames. Even being here wasn't entirely my own dream. I was simply following a character from a book. This restaurant actually reminded me a lot of a restaurant in Feral Woman, the one where Jacqueline had screamed at her lover. The road was even cobbled with black stone, just like in the book. If Jacqueline were here, if she could do anything she wanted, what would she do? I didn't even need to think. She'd drive north to the Alps on the border of France and Italy and climb Mont Blanc. The whole book had built up to that climb. Mont Blanc, I scribbled. Good. What else? Well, there was that exhibition that the Vatican Library was hosting in Rome next year, and when I had been younger, all I wanted was to work for the Vatican Library. I scribbled it down. Oh, and I'd never taken a cruise before. I scribbled it down. And I desperately wanted to dance again. I scribbled it down. And soon I scribbled another one, and another, and oh, how could I ever have forgotten how badly I wanted to see the libraries of Timbuktu? It felt like I was waking up to who I was again, scribbling down half-remembered dreams that hid on the tip of my tongue. It wasn't long till I had filled pages with my forgotten dreams, a list as long as the life I want to lead, a to-do list, an aim, a purpose, a start.